I do thank you for giving me just a couple minutes of your time. Here we argue for loving your neighbor and buying local. We argue for the voluntary society. Now, I admit there have to be laws, and there have to be laws that have the sword behind them. And those would be laws that protect life, that protect property, the sword being used against those who dishonor that law, right? And the laws that we find in the Christian scriptures are a few. There are not really that many of them. The codification of biblical law runs maybe to 80 or 90 statutes, and that's it. And the thing that's enforced in a common law society, like one informed by biblical principles, that would be a society where there's not a lot of writing about what the law is. There's simply possibly a record on how decisions are made based on the revealed law, the law that everybody knows, the law that's written in very plain language in the scriptures. Enforcing what would be called the eye for eye doctrine. Eye for eye sounds pretty bad, but it really is not. It's called lex talionis, and it refers to the idea of equity in the eye of God, right? God requires equity when wrongs are done, when evil is done in human society. When someone injures someone else, there needs to be a punishment or a restoration equal to the wrong, not less than and not more than. And that's what the eye for eye, tooth for tooth, stripe for stripe, wound for wound passages refer to, that the wrong is righted by an equal wrong paid back, or a compensation that equals the wrong done. In other words, if I steal your car from you and that car is recovered, I have to restore that car plus maybe another car, or that car plus a compensation for its loss, its time of loss to you. And in other words, if I'm the victim, I'm made whole by the restoration of my goods and some compensation beyond that. That's generally what happens. That's called restitution, or compensation, or making things right. And then there's death, and there's not a prison system between the two. We being wise in our own eyes, we have followed people in Christianity who made mistakes about theology and said, well, we have to have a prison system, and we have to have punishment. Punishment for bank robberies, for thefts, for rapes. We have to have our own system which rejects the biblical model. Rape is a capital offense. In the Bible, a rape is a capital offense. A kidnapping is a capital offense. If that were the case, then the arrest of Alex Wubbles on July 26th at the University of Utah by Jeff Payne, the detective, that would be a capital offense. Not by Alex the nurse, but by the officer. The officer could never dare do something like that if he realized that kidnapping is a capital offense. You would not have the Hanson Melvin cases in Chattanooga, where the officer kidnapped based on lies, kidnapped a man and charged him with a misdemeanor offense. But you simply wouldn't have. It would just not happen if kidnapping were enforced as a capital offense. But it's not, and it's not even a crime. Neil Pinkston does not enforce that is even a crime, a misdemeanor offense, but it is a kind of kidnapping. So murder, of course, is a capital offense. Murder, of course, is the intentional killing of a man, right, as opposed to an accidental manslaughter killing of a man. Both, there are different types of offenses. One cannot be paid for except by blood, and the other one can be paid for if it's an accident. If it's clearly not intentional killing of a man, that is an accident. That can be compensated for by payment or restitution. And if that's not, if the perpetrator does not have the money, well, then he is sold to pay it back. He's sold to pay it back. And so you have what effectively is judicial slavery. Now, we have judicial slavery today, but the people who are the perpetrators are not given any occasion to pay back to their victims. Grenda Harmer, the prisoner in Wartburg, Tennessee, in jail for another 2.5 years. He's in at 100%. He cannot get out early. There's nothing the system makes him do to pay back the people he terrorized in his aggravated robberies and other offenses. He gave me. I'll be publishing in the next day or two an interview that he gave me. And one of the first questions I asked is, "Why are you here? What did you do to be enslaved in this system?" The headline is, just by the way, the headline on my story, which is only at Nooganomics.com, only there, is "Guards Abusive in Prison System That Enriches Corporations." That's the headline. Q&A is a Q&A. And he's there for aggravated assault, especially aggravated robbery, especially aggravated kidnapping, reckless endangerment, and aggravated robbery. So there are offenses for which there has to be compensation. And the prison system, because it's state-centered, right? Because the state is the offended party and not the victim. The state demands nothing of its slaves in the way of making good to the victim of those aggravated kidnapping, robberies, and assault done by this man who says he's a Christian. This man says he's been converted to Christianity, and so we can hear about that. But anyway, where am I going with this? Oh, okay, yeah, I was losing track. Just by the way, the best quote of the week. It is a new week still, but I think probably the best quote that we'll see this week is that from the Chief of Police, David Roddy, and it's in a story by Dave Flessner in the Chattanooga Times-Free Press, and it's about the militarization problem that has come to national attention in the past 3 years since the Ferguson riots in August 2014. He says Chattanooga police officers do not use military surplus weapons to protect our citizens and have yet to receive a call that requires the use of a bayonet or grenade launcher. That is a great quote from David Roddy, the chief of police, suggesting that he understands the mayor's interest, Mayor Andy Burke's interest in having a review and maybe having a reform in the police department in the direction of not military strength, not muscle, not force, not threat, not brutality, but something different. Something different that is less harsh, less corrosive in the continuingly deteriorating conditions and the deteriorating relationship between the state and the people. We are in a time where the state has lost much of its glory, and in this time of declension of the modern state, the time of decentralization, we have hopes that the Democrat mayor of Chattanooga will end the effective use of, you might say, well, I won't say it quite as hard as I want to say it, but the use of abusive agency, that's his abusive agency, which is the police department. Police departments should be peacekeeping. That's what they should be there for, and they should not be there to harass the people. As often they do. Now, I wanted to get to Dinesh D'Souza. He is a noted conservative writer, and there's a story that he has on Breitbart today, which is worth noting. It's worth noting because of the destruction of the black race by the abortion clinic here in Tennessee. The abortion clinics are not keeping up with the black population growth, and I know that there are actors in that corporate world who regret that. They regret that they can't kill as many children as they'd like to who are black, and thereby diminish this despised race of people. And D'Souza looks into the Nazi affinity between Margaret Sanger, the affinity between Margaret Sanger on one hand, the founder of Planned Parenthood, and the National Socialist Party. She says in 1932, she believed in a kind of the idyll of communitarianism. She called for women to be segregated from the larger community onto farms and homesteads, where they would be taught to work under competent instructors and prevented from reproducing for the period of their entire lives. If the women didn't want to live this way, they could get out of it only by consenting to be sterilized. That's what he's citing here, Dinesh D'Souza. This is material from a new book that has come out, a new book called The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. That of course, Antifa is a Marxist, socialist, left-wing organization. Sanger's close associate, Clarence Gamble, who funded Sanger and spoke at her conferences, and Lothrop Stoddard, who published in Sanger's magazine and served on the board of her American Birth Control League, both knew about the Nazi sterilization and euthanasia programs, and praised them. There's a book. This review by D'Souza mentions a book, "The War Against the Weak," touching on the Nazi sterilization law of 1933, that were based on blueprints set up by Sanger, a writer named Papineau, and other American progressives. Right? This whole system comes from the left, the progressive movement. Sanger was on board as well. They both knew about the program. Stoddard traveled to Germany, where he met with a top Nazi official and even secured an audience with Hitler. His 1940 book, Into the Darkness, is a pay-in to Hitler and Nazi eugenics. Sanger, too, was on board. In 1933, she had her magazine, Birth Control Review, published an article, "Eugenic Sterilization," from Ernst Rudin, the chief architect of the Nazi sterilization program, and a mentor of Joseph Mengele, the doctor of Auschwitz, right? The angel of Auschwitz. Sanger's magazine also reprinted a pamphlet that Rudin had prepared for British eugenicists. Writing in 1938, when the Nazi program was in full swing, Sanger urged America to follow Hitler's example. Using the language of social Darwinism, the same that Hitler uses in Mein Kampf, she says, in animal industry, the poor stock is not allowed to breed. In gardens, the weeds are kept down. America, Sanger concludes, must learn from the Nazis and carry out nature's own mandate in getting rid of human weeds. Now, think about academicians who are boasting about letters, right? I've met a few important people, and I might, if occasion arises, say, well, hey, I got a letter from so-and-so, the noted historian, right, who wrote me a letter. Hitler, there's a tit for tat on comments from Hitler. Charles Goethe, he has a letter from, he returned from a 1934 fact-finding trip in Germany, wrote a congratulatory letter to his fellow progressive Eugene Gosney, head of San Diego-based Human Betterment Foundation. You will be interested to know, Goethe's letter says, that work, which is his book, The Passing of the Great Race, that work has played a powerful part in shaping the opinions of the group of intellectuals who are behind Hitler in his epoch-making program. Everywhere, I sensed that their opinions have been tremendously stimulated by American thought, and particularly by the work of the Human Betterment Foundation. I want you, my dear friend, to carry this thought to you, with you for the rest of your life. Hitler never quotes Margaret Sanger, but he was inspired by the writings of two of her associates, Leon Whitney in his American Eugenics Society, and Madison Grant of the New York Zoological Society. During the 30s, Whitney on one occasion visited Grant and proudly showed him a letter he had just received from Hitler requesting a copy of Whitney's book, The Case for Sterilization. Not to be outdone, Grant pulled out his own letter from Hitler, which praised Grant for writing The Passing of the Great Race, which a book that Hitler called his eugenic Bible. This incident shows how progressive eugenicists in America were well aware of their impact on Hitler and proud of their association with him. Well, this is David Tulis, and I do thank you for giving me just a couple minutes of your time. And we are here at Nooga Radio. There's a story I wanted to mention about how the good people really don't like unsupervised life. They don't like life that's not supervised. It touches on an editorial that I came across working on the Esprit newsletter this month about an editorial out of Iowa, and there's concern that people who are homeschoolers are not being supervised. And here's the line of thinking. Okay, because these people in home education are not supervised, well, they must be hiding things. They must be involved in activities which are nefarious and are depriving the public of the public's good. What about education laws and rules about attendance and truancy? This editorial says the state simply assumes independent private instruction. Children are in compliance Though Iowa youth have long been required to attend school from about age 5 through the school year they turn 16, no one knows what IPI students are doing. They can't be considered truant because they're automatically considered present in a home school. My, that's just really bad. Why, while all this raises obvious education-related concerns, it raises bigger concerns about safety. Children drop off the radar of schools and are also exempted from state-required immunizations, dental screening, and vision checks. No medical professional may ever see them. A birth certificate, assuming parents obtained one, may be the only record the child exists. Meanwhile, 91% of poll respondents think homeschooled kids in Iowa should be tested annually. The vast majority also think families should be required to review lesson plans with coordinators to take kids to local schools for regular welfare checks. So you see, the whole idea is that we have people who are living their lives outside of our regulation, outside of our surveillance, and we can only assume the worst. We must assume the worst because they're not under regulation. They have a free market in their educational enterprises, and they are fringe. They are on the fringe, and therefore we have to supervise them. Well, I think of course just the opposite is true. If people are left alone, they will generally do what's right. Even if you're a drunkard, you will generally try to do right by your children. Even though you may be an addict, you still have the impulse to do the right thing for your children, even if you're incapable at many points of doing the right thing. There is a natural instinct for people to care for their children. Even the wicked, if a child asks for a piece of bread, will not give that child a stone. Even the most wicked man, if his child asks for a cup of water, will give him a scorpion. Okay? Even the wicked look for their own children. And so here we have in Iowa doubt cast upon families that are in the private sector. They need to be supervised. We don't know what they're doing. And because we don't know, we have to assume the worst. I think just the opposite is true, and that is that the state itself, with its programs, its educational programs, its welfare programs, the state itself is the great enemy, and we need to favor local economy. We need to favor private solutions. And this is David Tulis, caller. You're live on the air. What's on your mind?
The reason why they ask these questions, David, is because we have generations of dumbed-down Americans. And I didn't give my daughter a social security number at birth, or to this day. They asked, how did you get away with that? And I'm like, what do you mean get away with that? How did they get away with convincing you need to give your kids a number from the federal government? Are you that stupid? So it's amazing that by what authority, anytime anyone from the so-called state, whether they're the dog catcher or the president, asks you a question, you're not required to give anyone any information ever, unless ordered by a judge, not even a cop, ordered by a judge, and it has to be a lawful order. You say, by what authority are you asking this question? Do you have kids? Well, by what authority? You send them a birthday gift? Or did they have a birth certificate? By what? Why are you asking me these questions? What is your position in life? Well, I'm from the state.
Department of Children's Services.
So, okay, I'm impressed. Now, what gives you the authority to ask me this question? Like the rule, regulation, or statute? And it's amazing people don't know that. Listen, the system requires three things of you. Well, let me tell you what the system is. Let's talk about this. The individuals elected and are hired.
Okay, Mike.
Communist welfare.
Mike, I'm sorry. Your call. You're breaking up on us. We can't maintain a conversation with you, Mike. Your phone is not providing your service. I think you've told me before. The state wants your time, your money, and your complacency, your obedience. The state wants those three things so that it can control you. And obedience is it will demand your obedience, even though it may not have lawful authority to do that. And I think it's a great question that my listeners should keep in mind. When someone says that you have to do something, simply do it in writing and do nothing by phone. Do it in writing and say, can you state your authority for making this demand? And often demands, when an authority has to be cited, there just isn't one. It's just, well, this is our policy. This is what our office does. This is how we've always done it. There are things like that that grow up as custom among state actors but there's no real authority. And so often one challenge will overturn an entire system. And the challenge always comes by asking the right question. And do what I do. I'm the slow man of Chattanooga. Why am I an aggressive journalist, as some people have said? Why am I a member of the press that has stories that other reporters don't get? Well, they don't get them because they don't care about them. And I ask the dumb question, what is your authority? Where is your authority? That's the dumb question to always ask, and put it in writing, right? Put it in writing that you have the authority to approach me, that you have the authority to ask me this question, and state what my liability is, state what my obligation is, if you don't mind, right? Just put it all together for me so I can understand. I really don't understand it. Send it to me, to the attention of my attorney, and I'll get back to you. And this is something that people need to do. Don't try to handle it on your own. Put it in writing and state your authority. That is the question. By what authority? By what authority? Americans don't ask that question enough, though there are a few people who do. They are the example. And I think of Carol Gaddy asking that question. By what authority do you demand to inspect my house without a warrant? That is a remarkable question. And it brought her a good bit of grief, right? It brought her a good bit of grief. And even this morning, I'm told that her husband, Thomas, was arrested on a failure to appear charge, because in this case with Dunlap, 2.5-year case, there have been other things that have happened to this couple. And I don't know that these are concerted efforts by friends of the mayor of Dunlap and so on. I really don't know, but there have been other things that have happened to them in the way of demands against them by courts and officers, apart from this case. So there are offscourings that happen to people of principle. Here they've won. They're not in jail. In Sequatchie County, they were freed Friday, but other things have happened in these other cases that may or may not connect with the main case that they have been fighting in Dunlap. If you stand your ground, you're going to become a target. And this, I say that because I want it to be a comfort to you, right? You're a target, but you also are representative. You represent people other than yourself. In a way, think of a fight against a state official as being one in which you're all by yourself. Maybe, unless I hear about your situation, I'll write a story about it. But you are representative, and yet you are by yourself. It's a funny thing. People who stand their ground and make their names on major court cases often have been very solitary, no support, no gifts of money, no legal support, no legal counsel. They're all by themselves, and yet they seem neglected, and yet they are in fact representative. Mrs. Gaddy represents all the people in her fight against the tyrannical, despotic demand against her by officials who got in over their heads and fighting her. And yet she was all by herself. She was very solitary, she and her husband. No legal help, no big gifts, cash gifts, people not knowing who she is, except from my reporting. They didn't know who she is. This is David Tulis. Take heart, love your neighbor, buy local, and brought all to you by Nooganomics.com.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports